Hey everyone, I'm your host Adrian. We do content like this weekly, so hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified. If you want more content like this, click the like button and please leave a comment. Thanks again for watching. Welcome everybody to today's Rupa University live class presented by Rupa University, the best way to learn about specialty lab work from industry experts. My name is Adrian Martinez and I will, as usual, be your host for this afternoon or evening session. Today we have a very, very special guest in Dr. Mark Pimentel with Gemelli Biotech, here to discuss diagnosing SIBO, IMO, and excess hydrogen sulfide using the Gemelli Trio Smart Breath Test. I'm so excited personally for this one. This is probably one of the most requested tests to bring on our platform in a long time. So getting a little sidetracked with my excitement, but before jumping in, a couple of quick housekeeping items to go over. Everyone joining will be muted by default, but don't fret. If you do have any questions, please use that Q&A button down in the menu bar and we will host a live Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Immediately after the Q&A, yours truly will show you exactly how to order these tests directly on Rupa Health. If you have to jump early, no worries at all. We are recording this session and you'll be able to find it all on rupauniversity.com in the coming days, along with the slides, and we'll go ahead and send it out to you as well. And additionally, if you are a fan of this type of content, be sure to check out rupauniversity.com to get access to all the previous sessions that we have done. And finally, for those of you who have registered for this session, we have a very special surprise for you. We're offering a 50% off coupon for the Trio Smart test to use on Rupa Health when you're ordering through the platform. So thanks so much to the team over at Gemelli for working with us and offering this to the amazing practitioners. So stay tuned after the presentation to see exactly how you can redeem that. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. I'd like to introduce Dr. Mark Pimentel. Dr. Pimentel is the executive director of the MAST program at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. This program focuses on the development of drugs, diagnostic tests, and devices related to conditions of the microbiome. Dr. Pimentel is a global leader in IBS and SIBO research and conducted the science on which the Trio Smart Breath Test is based. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Pimentel. I'll go ahead and let you take it from here.
Thank you. Hope you can hear me well. I'm going to take you through a very interesting journey. For those of you who've never heard me before, this is a very remarkable 25 years of trying to figure out what's going on with irritable bowel syndrome. But so I'm sort of showing this slide as a summary slide. This is what I'm going to show you. So this is kind of a spoiler, but it helps you understand because there's a lot of complexity to what's going on in IBS and how SIBO or bacterial overgrowth fits into the story, as well as other factors. So let's walk from left to right, and then I'll take this screen and dissect each piece and show you the evidence. But basically, it all starts from food poisoning. I was fine till I had food poisoning on a trip to Hawaii, or I ate at a restaurant and I got sick. But the problem is people don't always remember the food poisoning. It doesn't have to be part of the history. You can ask it as part of the history, and if they have that, then all the more reason that this is post-infectious. But often people don't remember 5 years ago the small food poisoning of 2 days of diarrhea, and they just think it's blended into their current chronic illness. But nevertheless, these food poisoning bacteria have a toxin called CDTB. CDTB is the culprit. I'll show you the data now. It's very clear that this is what's going on. And then you get this anti-vinculin. So the CDTB tells your immune system to form antibodies to you through a process called molecular mimicry. And when you have these antibodies, you then get a reduction in the migrating motor complex or cleaning waves of the gut. When the cleaning waves of the small intestine don't work well or don't happen often enough, you get bacterial overgrowth. I'm going to show you the data for that. And the reason why the antibiotic rifaximin is now FDA approved is on the basis that IBS is a microbiome in part condition. So let's dissect this now. Let's take this further. Can food poisoning cause IBS? Is this a cause? And I think the data are overwhelming. I'm not going to go into all the data because it would be too much for even 4 hours of presentation. But this summary slide presenting all the papers, so if I would have gone through all 25 papers on bacterial gastroenteritis listed here, it would take forever. But look at the number here. This is a Mayo Clinic study from 2017. 11% of people who get food poisoning now have IBS. That's 1 in 9. So that's pretty remarkable. But the other remarkable thing that you need to look at this data for is we now know the cause of IBS. If we now know a cause of IBS, we can now understand the pathophysiology of IBS. And I know, this meta-analysis came out in 2017, but work on this has been started in 1994 by McKendrick, and of course really flourished during the 2000s. And I'll show you some of the data that we've been part of that helped develop these tests that I'm going to show you today. But people say, well, I don't remember food poisoning, and how much of IBS could be due to food poisoning? And so this study we published in 2012, Eric Shaw is now head of motility at Dartmouth. We said, well, let's take the Center for Disease Control data. Let's pretend every American, all 300 million Americans at the time, nobody had IBS, none. And we overlaid the incidence of food poisoning in the United States on top of the 300 million and modeled that over many years. Well, you reach steady state at about 10 years. And at that time, 9.1% of the entire US population would have IBS on the basis of food poisoning. It's interesting, it's almost exactly the same percentage as what we see on the previous slide. But the point here is up to 2/3, maybe 60% of IBS could be explained by food poisoning using this MAP model. Even though this model is now a little bit old, we could probably update it and have a little bit more accurate numbers, but I don't think it's going to change much, this percentage. So does food poisoning lead to SIBO? Well, it's really hard to food poison humans in a clinical trial. That's unethical because you're giving a really nasty bug that can cause all sorts of problems, including Guillain-Barré from Campylobacter. So you don't want to do a trial of Campylobacter challenge to humans. So you have to do this in animal studies. So we did this, and this is 2008. You can see this has been going on for many years. 2008, we gave Campylobacter to 33 rats on the right, 33 rats on the left, got placebo. They got sick, and they got Campylobacter positive stools, and then after a total of a month, they recovered. But we waited another 3 months, so that's a total of 4 months watching these animals after recovery from Campylobacter. And then we did assess their stool to see if they had diarrhea or not. And then we did qPCR, which is a way of quantitating bacteria in the small bowel. And the bottom line here is that food poisoning causes IBS or SIBO, because in these rats, 27% of the rats now have bacterial overgrowth 4 months after the infection. So they developed SIBO. Not only that, if they developed SIBO, which is this, after Campylobacter, which is the C+, 84% of these rats had weird bowel patterns, stool inconsistency, or altered stool consistency, another way to say it. And so basically the rats got an IBS phenotype and SIBO, and the SIBO was what determined the phenotype. Incidentally, they also got increased rectal lymphocytes, which is a form of very mild inflammation in the rectum that is seen in humans with post-infectious IBS. So blinded readers looked at the rectums of these animals, didn't know which ones were the controls, which ones were the rats who got Campylobacter, and sure enough, again, lymphocytes. So the point is, this model of animals shows you get SIBO, you get IBS from food poisoning, and that connected those dots. So now fast forward to 2022. This paper just came out. Will Takakura is one of our fellows, who's now at the University of Michigan. But this is called the Bradford Hill criteria. And so this is a very detailed analysis of, does a bug, bacteria, cause a disease? And what is the evidence? And is the evidence strong enough? You have to meet most of the criteria for this to be true. And I'm not going to go through all the details of this. Again, it would take too much time. But essentially, the Bradford Hill criteria are met. Campylobacter is a cause of irritable bowel syndrome, which again, having a cause helps you figure out how to define the illness, understand the pathophysiology, and develop treatments. Okay, so now that we've established food poisoning causes IBS, food poisoning causes bacterial overgrowth, which causes IBS in the animal models, what is the factor in food poisoning that leads to this whole process, and through what mechanism? And so that's what we're going to focus on now, the toxin, the development of autoimmunity, and how it's damaging the gut, causing the bacterial overgrowth. Well, look at these organisms, Shigella, Salmonella, Campylobacter E. coli, they all cause food poisoning. But look how different they look. They're not the same. They're totally different organisms. And yet, they all share one toxin in common, which must be important, because if different organisms have the same toxin, it must be beneficial to them in some way. And sure enough, it is. But let's focus on this for a second. So CDTB, when we took rats and their gut and we stained for CDTB, even in animals who never saw Campylobacter, when we used antibodies on the tissue, the interstitial cells of Cajal, the special pacemaker cells of Cajal, became green, which means that the antibody to CDTB is binding to your nerves, cells of the gut, and to the ganglia of the gut. And this is a stain for those nerve cells and ganglia, and it just shows that they're co-localizing because the colors blend into an intermediary color.
Hey, Dr. Pimentel, real quick. It looks like the top of the Zoom on the slides may be blocked out a bit. I think that might be a issue with the Zoom, but would you mind being able to just unshare and reshare again? Beautiful.
Still the bar is there. I see the bar, but you don't see the bar.
Yeah. No bar on my end.
Okay,
appreciate the folks in the audience for calling that one out. Thanks so much.
I had some momentum going. I'm going to have to get
the energy
back.
Take it back. You got it.
All right, perfect. So here I showed you the cells. So the CDTB antibody is binding to the nerves of the gut. So we wanted to know, well, what the heck is it binding to? Because these rats didn't have Campylobacter. So we got these stem cells from emery, and then we blotted them, we lysed them, and put all the proteins on a blot, and then we used the antibodies for CDTB, put it on the blot, and it grabbed onto one protein at this weight, which is, we now know after sequencing, is vinculin. So being exposed to CDTB, you produce antibodies to CDTB, but some of those antibodies react to vinculin, which is a really important protein I'm going to talk about right now. So here's vinculin, these little red things, you can see it better here, the red things at the end of the green lines, which is the skeleton of the protein. Those are called actin filaments. And vinculin helps those actin filaments stretch out and grab onto the next cell. And you need that because nerves, like wires in the circuit of your house trying to turn a light on, they have to be connected to the switch. Or in the case of nerves, cell to cell, so the cells can transmit the electricity along the bowel. So what we then showed was we looked for these cells now in those rats that we did in the beginning that I showed you, and the rats who had the SIBO and Campylobacter is down here. You can't see any of those cells. So the cells that are responsible for the cleaning wave of the gut are diminished because of Campylobacter, and even more diminished in the rats who actually developed SIBO, again suggesting that the cleaning wave, the cells that make the cleaning wave, are damaged by this process. All right, so if that's true, if the migrating motor complex or the cleaning waves and these cells are reduced, does that mean you get overgrowth? And how does overgrowth and these reduced cleaning waves factor into IBS? Well, we studied this now in 2002. We didn't know why then. We just knew that cleaning waves are really important for preventing SIBO. So here's the study from 2002. I actually made this slide recently. I haven't presented this slide in almost a decade. And it's remarkable because I'm still, it still shocks me to see this data and go back because the p-values are so incredible. These are healthy people. This is the number of cleaning waves that these patients had over about 90 minutes, over about 3 hours of recording. You get about 2.5. So it's every 90 minutes the cleaning wave comes through. 50%, I want you to focus on those words at the bottom, 50% of IBS subjects had none in 3 hours, literally no cleaning waves. That doesn't mean they never have them, but that's a really dramatic reduction. And when it was there, taking the average of all those, it's really dramatically reduced. And even when the cleaning waves did occur, they were funky, they weren't normal, they were short in duration, they weren't as strong, and so they're very weak. And of course, this reminds me of the 1997 paper that said, look, if you don't have cleaning waves, you get bacterial overgrowth. So we've known about cleaning waves and overgrowth since 1977. Okay, so now let's put the pieces all together. You get the toxin, You get the antibodies, you then have a bacterial overgrowth, and that's how this is all working. So what we did was we said, well, let's just give rats CDTB toxin, nothing else, just the toxin, and put it in like a vaccine, like the COVID vaccine, in the arm. So if it's antibodies that are causing IBS and SIBO, then it doesn't matter where you're forming the antibodies from. It could be from the arm as an injection, and that's what we did. And first of all, they developed antibodies to CDTB, and the rats developed antibodies to vinculin after seeing CDTB. So they literally cross-developed antibodies to vinculin just from being exposed here. But I want you to focus on the right panel, because this is the most important piece of information. After getting CDTB, they developed SIBO, the rats who got the CDTB inoculation. So CDTB all by itself, you get SIBO. You also get weird bowel patterns like IBS and all of that. So CDTB alone is what's causing IBS and SIBO. So this is how it works. You get the toxin, you form the antibodies. They don't like any of this toxin, and so you form a lot of different antibodies in different locations, but one location looks like vinculin, and you form autoimmunity. So I want to show you some data now from DDW. It's hot off the press, literally 2 months ago, to prove this even more. We did this study again with CDTB. So we gave CDTB to rats, and they developed the CDTB antibodies. They also developed a wet stool, which is IBS. And then the higher the antibodies to CDTB, the more wet the stool was. So the antibodies were causing the problem. Now, we did this very complicated cytokine analysis, which are the inflammatory chemicals in the blood of these animals, and there were a number of things that were off. But the way they were off, we take the cytokines and we pretend we know nothing about the animal. We didn't know they got CDTB. We didn't know they got SIBO. We didn't know they got diarrhea. And we just used the change in cytokines in these animals. And here's what the cytokines would have predicted. It would have predicted that the rat was getting lipopolysaccharide exposure, which is from gram-negative bacteria, which is SIBO, by the way. That the rats are developing an autoimmune condition, which is on this side. And that the rats would be predicted to develop diarrhea, which is what we saw. So the cytokines were exactly matching what would have happened had we never known CDTB was being given. So it's remarkable, the internal consistency here. But look where all the action is happening. So they got the CDTB, they developed all these problems, but the cecum and the stool, the microbiome, don't look very different. Where things are different are in the duodenum and the ileum. So we're going to focus on the ileum here. And so what happens after the CDTB toxin? And this is really important as we get now to the human data here shortly. When you get the CDTB toxin, the rats, let's say the control rats are in orange. This is their microbiome, all over here, clustered here. The CDTB rats, after 3 months, they go in 3 different directions. One direction is green, they stay normal. So a group of rats stay normal. Another group go blue. They go higher E. coli in their small bowel, which is the hydrogen producer in SIBO. We know this. I'll show you this shortly. And the rats go to a third group, which is the desulfovibrio group, which is hydrogen sulfide production, which we'll get to in humans. So the rats go in all 3 directions after infection. One is normal, so they don't become abnormal, and the other 2 are hydrogen in the small bowel or hydrogen sulfide. All right, perfect segue to jump to humans. Now, do these antibodies help you with your patients? Well, yes. So we published the 2nd-gen test, which is the IBS SMART test, which is also part of Gemelli. And you can see if you measure CDTB antibodies and antivinculin antibodies in IBS and compare it not to healthy people, that's clear it's abnormal compared to healthy, but to other people with diarrhea, in this case, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, head and shoulders, the anti-CDTB and the antivinculin are above. Not only that, if both markers are positive, you're 98% certain they have IBS. So I'm using this up front in my patients. Patient comes in with diarrhea. I do this right away because if it's positive, I don't need to do a colonoscopy in a 20-year-old, 25-year-old woman where these antibodies are positive because it is IBS with 98% certainty if both are positive. So this is how it works. And then we're going to get into the human stuff. You've got a beautiful flora, everything's balanced, all sorts of different colors and characters. The nerves are all intact. You get exposed to, let's say, Campylobacter, or it could be Salmonella or Shigella or E. coli, and then you get exposure to the CDTV toxin. You see, as soon as you see the CDTV, the blood starts to show up as anti-CDTV antibodies. But the vinculin takes time, 3 months or longer, before you develop the autoimmunity. When you do, the nerves of the gut diminish, you get a lack of cleaning waves, as we've already shown you, and then you're going to build up of bad characters, either hydrogen producers or hydrogen sulfide producers, or both. Okay, so now we're going to jump to humans, because there's a lot of data here to go through. First off, I'm going to say that breath testing is abnormal in IBS. Full stop. This is a meta-analysis from just a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, from Shaw from Australia. Took all the breath test studies together and said, look, if you're IBS, you're way more likely, 8 times more likely to have a positive breath test than a healthy individual. So breath testing is abnormal in IBS commonly. But what's causing it? So the breath test is complicated because initially our breath tests in the 1970s and 80s were just hydrogen. I can't even imagine that now, because hydrogen doesn't predict symptoms. It predicts SIBO, but it doesn't predict symptoms. Methane predicts constipation, and you need hydrogen to make methane. So if you have methane on your breath test, your hydrogen is going to be low because the methanogens are eating all the hydrogen. So if you didn't know methane was present and you had a low hydrogen, you're not calling the right answer. The right answer is the methanogens are there, and that's causing the constipation. Similarly, because we didn't, and still in some cases don't have hydrogen sulfide until the TrioSmart test, you're missing another gas that eats hydrogen, except it eats it 5 times to make 1 versus 4 times for methane. So if you don't measure hydrogen sulfide, you're missing another component, and we now know hydrogen sulfide, higher it is, the more diarrhea, pain, and urgency. So the dictators of symptoms are hydrogen sulfide and methane. Hydrogen is a marker of SIBO. So it's without knowing all 3, you're missing the important chemistry and important factors that can tell you how to treat the patient. Since in 2007, culture studies have proven that SIBO is present in IBS. 43% of patients with IBS using a more conservative cutoff of 5 times 10 to the 3 is 43% have this in IBS versus healthy controls. But this is the study we lean on a lot, because this is 10 to the 3, 1 times 10 to the 3, which we believe is the correct cutoff for SIBO by culture. And you can see 60% of IBSD is SIBO. So we keep hitting on around 60%. 60% of food poisoning is connected to IBS. 60% of SIBO is connected to IBS. Food poisoning causes SIBO. So you see where this is all going and how they're all interconnected. We now know that 2 main characters. There's a third Aeromonas, but these are really the 2 main characters or bad actors. It's E. coli number 1, Klebsiella is number 2, and Aeromonas is number 3. But it's much higher in the small bowel, E. coli and Klebsiella, by a factor of 1 log 10. So that means there's 10 times more E. coli. And I'm going to show you more granular data on this, on how remarkable this SIBO is. And that's through the Reimagine study. This is a study we've been doing for about 4 years now, where we're taking aspirates from patients, consecutive patients coming in for upper endoscopy, but not colonoscopy, because we don't want them to drink the prep, because that can clean out the small bowel as well. And we're looking at a lot of diseases here, but the focus initially was on SIBO. So using culture, a positive culture, not breath test, on the right is SIBO. On the left is not SIBO. And the colors are now not culture, but the sequencing of the bowel. So sequencing of the microbiome to get down all the way to the genus level here. So let's walk this out. But you can see right away the group or phylum, Proteobacteria, is taking up almost 50% of the microbiome compared to non-SIBO patients. If we go all the way out to genus and species, it's if you add Klebsiella and E. coli, almost 40% of everything in the small bowel are those two species. Two species encompass 40% of all the microbiome. That's unbelievable. And if you look on this side, you can see there's Klebsiella, a tiny sliver, and E. coli, a tiny sliver of this whole amazing pie of hundreds of bacteria. So SIBO really is quite remarkably how much E. coli and Klebsiella take over. This is probably the most important slide in the deck in a sense, because what this says is if you use lactulose and you look at 90 minutes, the 20 part per million cutoff, people argue about the cutoff for breath tests. They should be looking at this paper because this is the cutoff that works best because it's 80%, 4% specific for SIBO. It matches up best with the sequencing. And most importantly, if you look on the right side, it correlates. So people argue, well, the lactulose gets to the colon and the colon bacteria are producing the hydrogen. It's not the small bowel bacteria producing hydrogen. That's not an argument after this paper because we show that the hydrogen producing pathways are upregulated in patients where the breath test is positive at 90 minutes. Not the colon is upregulated, but the small bowel. So the hydrogen is in fact coming from the small intestine. One more thing, I know this is a lot of information, but this is really important. So in our sequencing data, we presented this a couple of years ago, and we're going to be doing a very big paper to take this to a new level. But here's what I want to point to you. The microbiome looks like this. I know it looks like small colors, but this is at a higher level. But look what happens once you cross in culture on the bottom. This is sequencing, this is culture, 10 to the 3. As soon as you cross 10 to the 3, the microbiome becomes completely deranged. So everything's fine up until 10 to the 3. So that really is a good cutoff for SIBO. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about methane here now. So I told you that hydrogen is the source for methane, and then methane is produced, and then methane causes constipation. And probably many of you already know this because this is pretty well disseminated now, that methane equals constipation, and methane gas is actually causing the constipation. But we used to think, because E. coli is the bug, I just told you E. coli is the bug, but we just found out it's not in this intestinal methanogen overgrowth. We were not right in this assumption. We never measured it, we now did, and it's not E. coli. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Then there's sulfate-reducing bacteria, which convert hydrogen to hydrogen sulfide, and that causes diarrhea and urgency and pain. And that is linked. The hydrogen for this is coming from E. coli. We'll show you that. But now we want a breath test that has hydrogen sulfide, hydrogen, and methane in it, but that's not easy because hydrogen sulfide is very difficult to transport, doesn't last long, it's chemically reactive. So you have to have a material to contain it that is of the right material that is rated for measuring and keeping hydrogen sulfide stable for up to 7 to 10 days. And it has to co-mingle with hydrogen and methane and not affect those levels. And then you have to be able to measure all three gases in a single instrument in a particular way. And so the sensors have to be oriented in a way that it doesn't cause cross-reactivity. And then you have to do the science to create a new cutoff. And so that's taken years to get to, and we've come to that point now. But first of all, if you measure hydrogen or methane, it's the same as the old instruments, except Gemelli's instrument, the TrioSmart test, is the sensors are sensitive to 0.2 plus or minus, whereas the methane sensor in other instruments can be up to plus or minus 3 parts per million. So this is a problem. So if your instrument is plus or minus 2 or 3 parts per million, if your methane is 8 and the cutoff is 10, and you're plus or minus 3 in error, you could be positive. 11 is positive, 10 is positive. So you can't be plus or minus 2 or 3. You got to have a more sensitive instrument. But then there's H2S. And H2S cutoff for diarrhea is very clear. You can see this is diarrhea. These are constipated patients. These are healthy. So 3 parts per million is the new cutoff. The only reason I put this slide in is more hydrogen sulfide, more diarrhea, more abdominal pain, more urgency. So it's proportional. So that's really good because you can actually measure the hydrogen sulfide going down after your treatment, and that will usually proportionally go along with your symptoms. So how do we treat all of this? Well, we know rifaximin is FDA approved for irritable bowel syndrome. It's not approved for SIBO, but it is approved for irritable bowel syndrome on the premise that IBS is a microbiome condition. And look at this trial from the New England Journal of Medicine as the basis for the FDA approval, and everything is statistically significant. But this study, using the Target 3 data, shows that if the breath test is not done, let's say you never did a breath test, and you just empirically gave rifaximin, 44% of people would meet the FDA endpoint, which is a very difficult endpoint. If you did a breath test and it was negative, which we did breath tests in some of the patients in that trial, you only responded 25% of the time. If the breath test was positive, it's 56%. And if the rifaximin made the breath test normal, 76%. So the breath test is predicting who's going to respond to rifaximin. Methane is different. Methanogens, which make methane, are not bacteria. They're archaea. They're more old or ancient than bacteria. And we didn't design antibiotics for methanogens. We designed them for bacteria. So this is a little complicated story. So you have to give 2 antibiotics. At least that's what we learned studying this bug. So neomycin for by itself didn't work quite as well as neomycin plus rifaximin. This was a double-blind study, so it's helpful to have randomized controlled trials like this. So this is where we lean on to try and get rid of methane. Hydrogen sulfide, we're working on something right now. I can't talk too much about it yet, but you'll start to see it coming out in the next year or so, more information on it. But hydrogen sulfide, for now, we know from 1998 that bismuth is really good for hydrogen sulfide and can affect these bugs in a way that can help these patients. So I'll talk to you about how we use this. Finally, the last segment of this is really to talk about this new study we presented at DDW. There's a lot here. I've cut it down a little bit for this presentation, so we have a lot of time for Q&A, the 15 minutes that Adrian wants. And so, but what I'm going to do is, it all comes together in this one study. We took 2 studies, an IBS-D trial that's a randomized controlled trial, and an IBS-C trial that's a randomized controlled trial. We got stool on all these patients and breath tests on all these patients. Now, we only got stool on the methane positive C, but all of the D. So you're going to see that right here. So you've got an IBS-D group, you've got an IBS-C that has no methane, and an IBS-C that has methane. But of course, you can see that there's methane in this group, but the D patients don't have methane. Here it is, the blue marker here. No methane. Look at the blue line. So if you're a diarrhea patient, you don't have methane. And this is your methane, of course, if you're methane positive, but it's already predefined that you're positive. But my point here is that the D, they don't have methane. If you're D, you have hydrogen. So look at the 90-minute time point and the 20 parts per million, that's the cutoff. And the average was that the IBS-D patients had met that criteria, that 20 parts per million by 90 minutes. Whereas the methane patients had the lowest amount of hydrogen. And the constipated patients with no methane did not cross the threshold of 20, so they didn't have SIBO. So this is the best data we've ever had on breath testing in randomized controlled trials. Hydrogen sulfide elevated in D across the board. So D, you get the hydrogen sulfide. Methane makes you have more diversity, which is really interesting, diversity in your microbiome. But look at we've known this for a while, but this is the clearest example, clearest study. The bug that produces the methane is Methanobrevibacter smithii. Here's the M. smithii level in the constipated methane patients. Here's the M. smithii almost non-existent in the IBS-D patients. And this bug, M. smithii, correlated. So the higher it was, the higher their methane was on breath tests. So this is the character that we have to deal with. Remember before I said it's not E. coli giving hydrogen to the methanogens? I'm going to throw 2 names at you. Don't remember them, but it's Christensenolaceae and Ruminococcaceae. These 2 characters are what's linked to the production of methane, and they're hydrogen producers. So they're the ones that are living with the methanogens to help fuel the fire. IBS-D patients had the two characters elevated that produce hydrogen sulfide, and they were proportional to the hydrogen sulfide on breath test. That's Fusobacterium and D-sulfovibrio. Okay. Finally, we did metabolic pathways in the stool, and I'm going to just go to the next slide because it's very complicated, this slide, but it's summarized here. If you're a IBS-C patient with methane, your methane pathways are elevated. If you're a D patient, your hydrogen sulfide pathways are elevated in the stool of these patients. So the point here is in D it's hydrogen and hydrogen sulfide, in C it's methane. And this graphic here, which is the basically the visual abstract for this paper, hydrogen producers here, hydrogen sulfide here, and over on this side where you're now more constipated, it's methane and the methanobrevibacter. So to summarize breath testing, you gotta measure all three gases because you're missing stuff. And hydrogen sulfide is a nice addition to this because it gives you important, actionable information. So the story is what I told you: food poisoning, a toxin, CDTB, developing autoimmunity to vinculin. You can measure these antibodies and give patients an answer immediately within a few days. That causes a reduction in interstitial cells of Cajal, which leads to stasis in the gut because less cleaning waves. You get bacterial overgrowth, and you can use treatments. So what do we do? How do we use these tests? So you could go empiric. Give empiric rifaximin, but I do the anti-CDTB, antivinculin antibodies on all my patients now, and I do the 3-gas breath test in patients with chronic diarrhea who are suspected of IBS-D. If you have positive antibodies, 90% plus chance that they have IBS, and that I give them counseling because they can't let these antibodies go higher. The higher they are, the worse they are. That's what we're seeing in clinic. That's what I'm seeing every day. And so we give them travel prophylaxis. We give them travel prevention strategies to prevent food poisoning. Now, if the breath test is negative and the blood test is negative, you got to look for something else because something else is going on. If hydrogen is positive, I give rifaximin. If hydrogen sulfide is positive, I now give rifaximin plus bismuth, and that's been working very well. If they're mixed diarrhea and constipation, they really fall on the left side because the anti-CDTB and antivinculin in our original papers were positive and mixed as well. It's only when you're really true constipation that you just need to know methane positive or not. And methane, we give rifaximin and neomycin based on the double-blind study that I told you about. And then if they're negative, consider further workup. Something else is going on. One substitute could be metronidazole for the neomycin. Even though we haven't published the metronidazole, but we found clinically that this works well. So in conclusion, IBS is a small bowel microbiome disease. SIBO is an important contributor to IBS. The most important organisms for regular SIBO and D is E. coli and Klebsiella, and then now we know the organisms that produce hydrogen sulfide. Methane is the cause or associated with the constipation side of things. I just said that hydrogen sulfide is clearly important in the diarrhea side. Getting rid of methane improves constipation. Getting rid of these other gases improves diarrhea. Autoimmunity produced by CDTB and vinculin from gastroenteritis is the starting point. It's the root, and it is a causative factor because the antibodies are proportional to the illness. So the higher the antibody, the worse the illness. So they're causative. So IBS is an organic disease in this context. Remember, not all of IBS is this, but 60% of it is. So now that the microbiome of IBS, C, and D are more completely understood, we're working right now actively on better targets for treatment because the story is now more complete. So I'll stop there and stop sharing, and I'll open it up to any questions now.
Dr. Pimentel, that was awesome. We got some great feedback through the chat. But with that, y'all, let's go ahead and just jump right into Q&A. And just to recap, if you have to hop off early, no worries at all. We always record these sessions, and we will be sending it out along with the recording and the slides in the coming days once we've had the opportunity to edit. And for those of you who joined a little bit late, Gemelli has been amazing and gracious enough to offer a 50% off coupon for this Trio Smart test when ordering through Rupa Health. So we're going to jump right into Q&A. And if you do have any questions, feel free to just add them in the Q&A button, and we'll be sure to get back to them or try to get to them as best as we can. So the first question that we got is, have you ever evaluated for bioflow or health in your studies?
This is an excellent question, and it's a really important thing we're trying to get. Well, let me start by saying bile acid assessments are extremely complicated. DDW, there was a presentation on bile acid assessment using mass spec, and in one patient, they found 6,000 different bile acids, and they're trying to dissect bile acids more completely. Obviously, there are the usual suspects, and we know that bacteria and bile acids, when you mix them together, you get all sorts of weird things happening, and secondary bile acids that can be toxic. So the answer to your question is, we're looking into bile acids now because we have all this material. We have a mass spec we just purchased. It's $750,000, so we got to make use of it because of questions like you're asking. We need to get to the bottom of it. And we don't have that answer, though, but stay tuned.
Beautiful. The next one is from Steve, who's joining us. First and foremost, he says, thank you for all the amazing information. And how are you dealing with insurance companies' general reluctance to approve rifaximin for treatment in SIBO-associated IBS?
Well, you got to think of it like H. pylori and peptic ulcer disease. The disease is peptic ulcer disease. The cause is H. pylori in that patient. The disease is IBS diarrhea, for which rifaximin is approved. SIBO is a causative factor. So if you have to call it what it is, because rifaximin is FDA approved for IBS-D, so you call it IBS-D because that's what it is. And you're more likely to get rifaximin approved for IBS-D than calling out SIBO. It's just the insurance companies are always looking for ways to stick to the label, which you are. I mean, you're not sticking to the label. It is IBS-D. It's just in that patient, SIBO is the cause.
Yep. The next question we got is, are you able to reduce the antibodies? That was in reference to one of your later slides.
So you guys are way too smart for me. But the antibodies, if they're causative, if you get rid of them, you're going to make the patient potentially cured. And that is exactly where we're heading. It's going to take 10 years to do that, though. Wow. This is not an easy thing to do. We have done it using very sophisticated things, but it's not healthy for patients to do those things in the long term. We need something very boutique that will just get rid of the two antibodies that we're talking about and cure this. And then we don't need anything else. But this is going to take a long journey. So I'm not going to say stay tuned on that one because we're going to be on the Zoom call for the next 10 years. That's too long. Adrian's recording will explode.
Yep. I don't have enough memory in my computer to handle that recording. Wow, 10 years away. Well, don't hold your breath, but it is on the way. And who knows? Maybe sooner. Do you typically advise protokinetics and high antibody patients?
Yeah, so the higher the antibody, the more damaged the migrating motor complex and those cells are. So they're more likely, especially the higher the antivinculin antibody, they're more likely to be on prokinetics. So let me tell you what happens in my clinic, is that if their antibodies are under 2.5, then generally speaking, a prokinetic will 2.5 for vinculin, because 1.6 is the cutoff. So between 1.6 and 2.5, usually one course of rifaximin, they will have a relapse. And then I'll retreat them and put them on a prokinetic. But the patients where their antibodies are over 3, which we see occasionally, it's very hard for the prokinetic to work. And often, I would say I probably have a dozen patients where I have them on chronic rifaximin because nothing else helps them. And it does. The chronic rifaximin helps them. I'm not advising you to do this, and it's probably going to get hard for insurances to cover this. But unfortunately, that's why I don't want That's why I measure the antibody, and that's why I don't want them to get food poisoning again now that I know that they have this antibody, because I have patients where they were 2.4, doing okay, went somewhere, didn't take precautions, and now it's over 3, and we're on chronic rifaximin with them. So I mean, it's really important not to let that happen because it's more challenging.
How often should you retest a patient?
So we retest. Okay, so CDTB, as I said, if you get CDTB, it goes up with the food poisoning. If you don't develop autoimmunity, I have patients like this. I have a guy who swam in his neighbor's pool when they were on vacation. That's a long story. But the pool wasn't being filtered, so he got really sick. And then he got IBS. His CDTB went way high, but he never developed autoimmunity. And he developed IBS. But then over the course of 2 years, his CDTB went away completely. He's on no drugs now. He's back to normal. So I follow it about once a year, should be enough. Twice a year, it depends on, if it's anti-CDTB only, I'll follow it maybe a couple of times in a year to show that it's going down, which is a good thing. If it's anti-vinculin, usually it's stable. It doesn't want to come down because you have vinculin in your body.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to talk to you offline about that pool story. That sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, there's more to the story, believe me.
Yeah. Getting to the root problem of how that happened, I'm sure was a little bit embarrassing.
Yeah.
What labs can do the anti-CDTB and anti-vinculin antibodies?
Well, the lab that does the second generation test, which is the one with epitope optimization for the data that has the best specificity, is Gemelli, the who you're talking about later, Gemelli Biotech.
That's who we're here to talk about. Instead of mixed, what about sequential? 1 year severe D followed by 1 year chronic C, then SIBO positive, didn't separate gases.
Then SIBO positive, didn't separate gases. Does that mean they didn't have methane, or?
This is from Sid. So maybe Sid, if you could provide a little bit of clarification, I'm just reading exactly what they wrote, was instead of mixed, what about sequential? 1 year severe D followed by 1 year chronic C and then SIBO positive.
Yeah, so I'm curious what gases they had when the SIBO was positive. Was it IMO or just SIBO? Because some people use them interchangeably, but it really should be SIBO or IMO. If it's SIBO, then we do see that occasionally, or they can switch to methane. But I got to say, in 20 years, I have seen many people get rid of their methane, but I have seen one patient only in 20 years who was chronically SIBO and became IMO. It just doesn't happen. You don't flip the switch to IMO very easily. I don't know if I've answered your question, Sid, but they showed one line for both gases, but a lot of Smithii in, so probably that's a stool study he did. Well, if you see a lot of Smithii, I mean, a lot of the commercial tests are now trying to measure Smithii in the stool. It's just I don't know how validated they are versus breath tests. We're validating what we're doing with breath tests, and it's very clear that they're associated. But that's our methodology, so I don't know about the methodology there. Anyways, my point is, if they're Smithii and they're constipated, I would give them the rifaximin and neomycin if it was my clinic.
Perfect. We'll hop over to Scott Byers' question in the chat. Do you recommend glucose or lactulose for the Trio Smart test? Does it come with both options?
Yeah, so it has both options, and glucose is a valid test that a lot of medical centers use. However, what I would say is that the problem with glucose is that it misses SIBO sometimes because it gets absorbed so quickly. So you can use glucose. Both are available through Gemelli on Trio Smart, so you could do either. But just be aware that sometimes you miss some cases if you don't do lactulose.
Sure. What about looking at saliva, antimicrobial properties, and stomach acid?
Yeah, so saliva is a little bit tricky because there's a lot to learn. So for example, in the Reimagine study, we're collecting saliva, microbiome, small bowel, and stool. So we're going to have more information on the relationship between saliva and small bowel. But a lot of the studies or a lot of the labs that measure saliva, they're not measuring small bowel. So it's not really, they're not using it as a surrogate. They're just basically saying it's saliva. But there is some saliva bacteria that get down there. Anyways, I'm getting off on a tangent on that. But the other part of the question was saliva, and what was the other?
It's looking at saliva, antimicrobial properties, and stomach acid.
And stomach acid, yeah, stomach
acid. Also, feel free to go off on tangents. I think
yeah.
people the tangents.
Well, yeah, my wife says I'm always on a tangent, but but basically, acid in the stomach is interesting. So if you're on a proton pump inhibitor, some people thought, well, all that reduction in acid means you get SIBO. We actually did the sequencing study on that, and it's not true. It doesn't happen. But acid is important because if you have less acid, you have less Smithii. So low acid, because acid is a hydrogen source for Smithii to produce methane. I'm not saying that you should take Smithii patients and put them on a PPI, but what I'm saying is that some people give acid to patients, like betaine HCl or those sorts of things, and they don't really do much, and they might make more methane. They may do things for other things. They might help digestion, they might help denature proteins if you're having trouble digesting proteins, but in terms of the microbiome, acid may be more harmful than helpful.
And last question we have here is, what are the food poisoning precaution recommendations you give to your patients?
So in some patients where the antibodies are high, I will give them, well, first of all, I tell them all the usual things. Don't eat the raw stuff, eat the cooked stuff. Drink beer, drink soda. Don't have anything with ice in it because the ice is made from the local water. And always remember that when you eat food on a plane, it comes from your the city you're leaving from. So if you're leaving from Honolulu, the food's from Honolulu. If you're leaving from Los Angeles, it's from Los Angeles. If you're leaving from Cancun, it's from Cancun. So just think about that. So you should always think about what you're eating, even on the plane on the way back. But what I do for the more extreme patients, I will give them half a rifaximin with every meal during their travels. I'll give you one tangent story. I have an IBS-D patient, lovely young woman, doing great. Her SIBO's under control. She's going to Costa Rica. 20 people going to Costa Rica, touring around the country. I give her half a pill of rifaximin with every meal. There are 19 people on the bus with diarrhea, but the one who has a normal bowel movement is my IBS patient. And that to me is the greatest gift I've ever received from a patient right there. So
I can attest, as somebody who went on a trip with 20 people to Costa Rica last year, and having been one of the individuals suffering from the diarrhea, I'm quite jealous of the your patient outcome in that situation. So doing great.
You're at risk of becoming one of my stories, though, so be careful what you tell me.
More than happy to, honestly. You seem like somebody who would have a number of great stories, and I'm sure we can do a whole live class just on a couple of the stories from your patients alone. But Dr. Pimentel, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon or evening or wherever everybody joining us is located. Any final thoughts?
No, I have to say, I mean, your group is fantastic. The questions that I got really are par none. I think what I presented, you really understood it, and I can tell by the questions. Some of the advanced things that we're going to be doing, they're spot on. So I really appreciate the group, and I appreciate your time and attention. And I hope you can help some patients with the information I provided. So take care.
That is hope, absolutely. So you're welcome to hop off. And for those of y'all who are able to stick around for a few more minutes, as I mentioned in the chat a few times and at the very beginning of the presentation, what I'd love to do is just transition into a demonstration of Rupa Health and show you exactly how you can order the Trio Smart test from Gemelli directly on our platform. Not only can you order this test, but you can actually order any test that Gemelli offers, as well as tests from over 25 to 30 different labs all in one place. What's really amazing about partnering with Gemelli through this presentation is they've actually offered a 50% off coupon for the Gemelli Trio Smart test for everybody here today. So really big shout out to Gemelli and their team. Thank you again for this amazing opportunity. And so I'm just going to hop right into it, y'all. So for those of you who are new and joining us for the first time on this live class is what we call it, you're a part of Rupa University. Rupa University is the educational component to Rupa Health, where we host content like this on a weekly basis with our lab partners. This week, of course, being Gemelli. So you're able to hop on for about an hour-long session, learn and get a little bit more of a deep dive into exactly what these tests and what these labs offer to our practitioners and how we can help our patients, right? And the reason why we host these here on Rupa Health is a functional lab platform that's designed to make life easier when it comes to functional lab testing, right? Most practitioners that we speak with work with anywhere from 3 to 5 different labs at any given time. What that means is you have to go to each individual lab that you want to work with to set up an account, to place your orders, to manage your results. All that, if you're working with multiple patients, can be a bit of a headache to manage, right? And so what we've done is we've created a single marketplace that will allow you to be able to order from over 30 different labs in one place, of course, including Gemelli. So one single sign-on, and you have access to over 3,000 different labs. To show you how simple it is to use, I'm going to show you just really quickly how we can actually place an order on Rupa Health. You'll go to rupahealth.com. It's a free account to sign up for. You just need to be a practitioner located in the US with an MPI number and located in 47 of the 50 states. Unfortunately, the 3 states that we can't currently operate in are New York, New Jersey, and Rhode Island. Don't worry, we're working on it, but currently those are the 3 states that we cannot operate in. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just show you how simple it is. All we need is the patient's first name, last name, and email address. From there, you can go ahead and start an order. Once we have our order screen up, you'll see that we can select and create different custom bundles. A custom bundle being a set of tests, a set of blood panels from any one of the labs that we work with. You can just have one click and all those tests added into your cart straight away. Below that, you can create a favorites list. A favorites list is comprised of just individual tests that you commonly order. And so you can put a little heart next to it. And from there, I can order that Gemelli Trio Smart test straight away. From there, if I had that coupon available, which you all will be sent that coupon, don't worry, it'll be sent out in the follow-up email along with the recording in the coming days. I know that's a big question coming through the chat. We'll go ahead and send that email or that coupon out with the email along with the recording at some point next week, y'all. So I'm super excited for it. But once you get that coupon added to your account, you just go ahead and hit apply. So hit apply on that coupon. You'll notice that it'll bring that price straight down straight away. And then you can go ahead and click send to patient. And that's how you're able to order that Trio Smart test on Gemelli, or Trio Smart test on Rupa Health straight away for 50% off right on our platform. Simple as that, y'all. From there, once you send that order through, you're able to track all of your orders in this main dashboard here. If I want to click into a current existing order, I can go ahead and see exactly, where the status of that order is at, when I can expect the results to come in. Once the results are in, I'm able to open up my order. I can download the results. I can send the results to my patient. I can send them. I can schedule a clinical consultation with the lab that I'm working with. If I do need some assistance interpreting those results, we do interface directly with those labs as well. We will not send the results to your patient without your consent. And if you are working with EHRs like Practice Better or OptiMantra, we can actually work with them as well and have your results just immediately imported into that EHR. So the idea here is to make life easier when it comes to lab testing, right? But not only is Rupa Health a place where you can come and learn and watch these live classes and order your tests, we want to make it even go a step further, right? And the way that we do that and make it a complete process here at Rupa is that we actually manage the patient experience as well. So as soon as you send that order to your patient, we can effectively take it from there. We can manage billing directly with your patient. We offer multiple different payment solutions beyond cash and credit. We can accept HSA, we can accept FSA, we can even set up a 3-month interest-free payment plan with your patient. We'll reach out to the patient to send over instructions and FAQs, videos on how to take the test. We'll even follow up with the patient, answer any support questions that they have. So if they have any support, they come to us. Additionally, we'll even manage any specimen issues, right? So all things that would ultimately take time out of your day, we'll go ahead and manage that for you. The idea here is to save time so you can help see more patients, help more patients, spend more time with your family, play more golf, whatever you want. We'll give you more time back in your day when it comes specifically to lab testing. This is what it looks like. So once you press send on that order, we'll go ahead and alert the patient. We'll take down all the necessary information to complete the order. Or if you pay for the test, which is an option, you have that option of doing that here, and we'll go ahead and just collect the shipping information to send to the patient. We won't show any pricing to your patient if you decide to pay for the test. From there, we'll notify the patient once the kit has been shipped out. And then from there, we'll go ahead and send an email that looks similar to this. So this will break down any FAQs, instructions, videos on how to take the test, walk the patient through how to fill out the requisition form. And even if there's a blood draw required on the test that you're ordering, we can help coordinate that phlebotomy with your patient. We can either customize the instructions and let them know, hey, your practitioner wants you to come see this patient or this blood draw location. We can do that. or we'll go ahead and send over options based on the lab that they're working with. But let's say that your patient wants an additional option. We'll go ahead and send your patient, let's say, a mobile phlebotomist that they can go ahead and have come to see them to have their blood drawn. So again, the idea here and the ideal flow through Rupa is place your order for your labs. We take care of everything in between. You get the results into your Rupa Health platform or potentially even into your EHR. From there, you're notified as the results come in. And it's as simple as that, y'all. Rupa Health is a free platform to sign up for. You go to rupahealth.com, sign up for free. All you need is an NPI number, and we can take care of the rest. I'm going to go ahead and share my my contact information up on this screen real quick. So if you do have any questions or want to get in touch and talk about how to redeem the coupon or go through any of that, I'm more than happy to set some time up. So to just reiterate one more time, the way that we will go ahead and send this coupon out is once we've had the chance to edit the video, we're going to go ahead and send that coupon out along with the recording, along with the slides. So you will get everything in due time. Now, if you do want this coupon immediately, we can go ahead and get that over to you. Just go ahead and reach out to me directly and I will send you the link to the coupon. Otherwise, we will send it out along with the recording once we have the chance to be able to edit that video in the coming days here. So again, my name is Adrian. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. That was an amazing presentation with Gemelli and Dr. Pimentel. Very excited for you to all be here with me and joining us on this a little later in the afternoon presentation. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Have a great rest of your week. Have a great weekend, and we will talk soon.